And but you know, they bring up so much money. You know, you figure every meal they do, they eat out.
Mm-hmm. And let's just start, before we can get into donuts, let's just start with you a little bit. You know, what's your background? How did you wind up being associated with Bill
Oh, okay.
and working with him and whatnot?
Basically, what occurred was probably right around ending junior high. I've always read a lot and collected books. I got None Dare Call It Conspiracy and a few of the classics, and read them, and a lot of stuff made more sense than what I was hearing even in school at that age even, or seeing on the news. It was a pretty routine thing as Mom and Dad were getting ready every morning. I'd sit in the living room while Mom ironed, and we had a real small house, and watch the news. And I would ask questions like, well, what's this inflation? I don't understand, and this and that. And they would explain it to me and why it was essentially a contrived thing or an artificial tax, really. And so a lot of that I carried along, and they never really pushed or guided me any direction. Interests I stumbled upon through reading, and it developed it on through high school. Pretty politically active. Went to Washington D.C. on some debates on the floor of Congress. It was a program to teach students the legislative process, and then for the 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, there was the Supreme Court had started a 5-year program to celebrate it that basically entailed learning every aspect of the framers and founders and being able to pull anything out of the hat when you were asked. And then we went to Sacramento to compete state-wise, and then the finalists all got to go to the nation's capital and compete. So I just kept following this track, and then I joined the military, and then when Saudi came along, I volunteered to go. My unit was not going, and being young and gung-ho, like they make you, if you weren't already, I said, well, I'm going somehow, so sign me up somehow to go. And I ended up being sent to a unit out of Vegas, and then on over with 3rd Armored Division. And I went on the main ground attack. We were the lead battle unit in the M1 Abrams tanks. Got a lot of decorations. I was the most decorated in my division. And but one thing there really solidified a lot of the stuff I had read, you know, concerning the State Department Rockefeller grants to Russia to build, you know, the huge so-called truck factories that were pumping out tanks, though. Because when we started capturing this Russian equipment, T-72s, T-62s, BMPs, which are their version of our APC and Bradley, a lot of this stuff you could take home as a souvenir for the unit to display on our company area. And also, tons of it, we were being tasked once the big stuff was done with hauling back to the rear. And these, like the Port of Doran and stuff, were these huge ports. And this stuff was being essentially refurbished, but way better than the Russians ever even originally built it. Because the quota system, you saw the results and the quality. Their main battle tank, the T-72, bearings on the turrets with flat sides on them. Because, you know, they got to the end of the month and we're 30,000 units behind or whatever, start pumping them out. Because we got to meet the quota. And the vodka incentive didn't help much, which was the plan over there. And basically, these were all spooks. Everybody was wearing suits and were civilian. These weren't military personnel, and they admitted it. They wore suits with ties out in the desert. And they would paint on the sides of these tanks, like no pictures and stuff, and spray paint if they were friendly fire, like our own tanks. And then the enemy stuff we were picking up. They had us hauling that and our M1 Abrams that we chose not to take back to the States due to just hours on their power packs and stuff, up to the Kurdish rebels and to Israel. So we were there fighting a guy and all the problems of arming that region, and then we're turning around and we're not even home yet, and we're already rearming these nomadic tribes and everybody, the Kurds, the Bedouin tribes in Saudi, Israel even more so because we're already there. It was a nice way to write it off, and there's no port documents to prove nothing. And the most astounding thing upon collection of the foreign artillery pieces, and en masse, I mean, just anything we didn't melt, essentially, because when we hit it, it got hit bad. Uh, when they started doing the mass surrenderings, uh, we were collecting this stuff, and we'd spray paint the V and then the A looking thing, and it was really just, they were just like this or like this. Imagine the two halves of a Masonic symbol separated. One was Victor and one stood for Allies. And that way the pilots and other tank crews wouldn't zero in on them, blow them up. And we were having a heyday with these, and once I got done off perimeter duty, because I was an M60 gunner, and ended up guarding this MASH unit, the division's main hospital, we went out there and we were gathering this stuff. Well, we didn't need any instructions. We'd been training all the weapon systems, so if you picked up anything from an SSP-40 to an AK to whatever, you could use it. But you jumped in them, and all the data plates, which is common throughout the militaries of the world, they're metal tin plates stamped with the essentials, maybe your shift pattern, whatever, starting configuration, and they're located wherever that control is. They're all in English. And these are right out of Russia, though. And those plants have long been ran by American engineers since they were started through, Rockefeller Gold Grants and State Department. And so this just solidified everything I had been reading for years about us funding the Russian military machine and really contriving the whole Cold War. And we saw the ethics of it there in that initial Desert Storm. Hussein had been getting tons of stuff from other people that we had backed or didn't back, during the Shah of Iran and everything, and Afghanistan against the Russians. And then also from the Russians directly, playing both ends against the middle. And he followed the Russian tactics perfectly by the book. And it proved to be such an utter failure. Field tactics, equipment, everything. I think it really was an example to all the Russian republics around the world that, man, we really screwed up this last, 50 years or so, 60 years of all this planning. It just didn't pan out. They would have never beat us in any sort of conventional war, and that proved it. And I think that caused a lot of the disruption in the Eastern Bloc region, because everything was done perfect, and we just wiped it out in 100 hours. So, and that really solidified things, and I came back home, went into reserves, and the cutbacks were horribly, just taking out people left and right. And went back to college some and got a regular job, and just stayed in reserves. But I would go on a lot of missions and stuff. And this is when I started seeing a lot of the stuff coming into the country that was only speculation at the time amongst civilian intelligence agencies and the occasional whistleblower like the famous L.A. journalist who caught the CIA bringing in container loads in Chinese shipping units of weapons. Well, that would be, 91, 92, right when we all came home. And we were seeing it there. Because occasionally there'd be a little accident, and like the whole thing would go because it had bombs in these bastards, right from the ground attacks. They were loaded, hundreds of thousands of weapons getting loaded back onto ships, and it was stuff that units were picking up. I'm sure half of it was probably just ill attempts at souvenirs. People bring home crazy things and things like that, and the other half was too organized. They were stacked neatly, clean, preserved.
Chinese weapons?
No, they're Russian weapons, but a lot of it, once it made stateside, the stuff coming into Long Beach Harbor, things like that, which major shipping for the Saudi conflict, in and out both ways. A lot of the shipping vessels used, because the budgetary constraints had pretty much wiped out the Navy as being able to haul the amount we needed before and after. So there was tons of just merchant marines, civilians all over. And you'd go talk to them, because these are like maybe wheat ships, where the whole deck's just open up layer after layer, and you crane everything down, and then layer closes, and that's your new floor. they were very astute at this weapons and all this stuff, more so than you would think of a merchant marine. It's supposed to have been hauling grain his whole life. And a lot of the stuff coming back into port, though, were Chinese containers. Costco, for instance, that's a huge Chinese, well, the biggest in the world for Chinese international freight, and ran by China, owned and ran by them. Too many weapons on both ends, because everything was theoretically inspected by customs. Just to get out of country, we had to dump our bags in private booths, and it was one last chance in case you had any paraphernalia to drop it. And they would even check the seams of the uniforms in the guise of looking for gold. Gold was incredibly cheap there, and GIs were bringing it in by the bag loads. And of course, there's a lot of illegal paraphernalia from all that region, your hash. Unfortunately, guys getting that by the truckload. And a lot of this stuff was getting through in insane amounts, illegal activities. When I was at the port, my unit came home, and me and my one of my best friends ever, I won't name him only because I don't have his permission, but we re-upped for another 2 over there, and we had to stay so long because we had to re-prep the equipment, so it was painted green again and ready that if something happened and while that ship was maybe even en route, it could be diverted, land in Germany and be ready, or land wherever. And everything was assigned barcodes, the containers, incredibly and meticulously inventoried by customs. Well, we started finding these really weird things, like some of the large units, divisional size units, not these little, let's say, National Guard unit out of Kentucky or something, that had en masse night vision gear, more than a whole division would ever get issued, let alone brand new, coming back home. It made no sense. And then on this other end, shortages when we got back home. So we knew we loaded just billions of units of this and that, supplies and logistical materials, and you get back home and you can't get it.
So going over there, you had plenty of equipment coming back, it just disappeared.
Yeah, somewhere en route between loading, and then the fact that the mass of it appeared to be getting inspected so meticulously by customs officials and the military side and the civilian customs officials. And then to have these containers show up just full of weapons from front to back, Russian weapons, that somehow got through the whole inspection process. But the container had the barcode on, which a computer entry was made for what was in that, and that way they could scan it. Belongs to this unit. Here's everything down to the last nut and bolt that's supposed to be in that. And they pop them open, and sometimes they bust it open when they're craned up and down into the ship, and out pours vehicles and mortars and rockets. And it was supposed to be uniforms and bandages and the like.
So what were you thinking at this point?
Well, at that point, with having my reading background and stuff and documented research, why were we taking back massive amounts of Russian equipment, and where was it going? Friends back here I had contact with on the unloading end were like, no, we're not finding hardly any of that, the occasional piece. So where was it going? Because for what we found, or what accidentally got found, if the door just outright popped open maybe or something, or the ship, sometimes that happened when the load shift and the crews would report it. That percentage did not even correlate with what we know we never had a chance to check. It was just taken for granted that the inventory list was correct and loaded. And what was appearing on the other end was drastically less again. So statistically, it made no sense with the amount we saw, and we knew we were only seeing a portion of it, and then what was received. So whether it was dropped off en route or multiple ports on the way back home, because that isn't uncommon just due to maintenance and fueling and everything else for the crews. Also, I had friends that rode on these ships. You had to accompany them going over and coming back. And basically, every day you help the merchant marines and their crews with the equipment tie downs, make sure it's secure, the loads. And they the merchant, when you're on the open seas, that captain of that vessel is in charge. There is no ifs, ands, or buts, whether he's a foreigner or not. And you follow their rule or you can get locked up, really, just in a little teeny room the whole trip until you get on the other end. And they said it was incredibly strict. They were monitored everywhere they went. And it wasn't even so much security, they said, because they had to check the equipment every day, so there again, when it hit, it was ready. They would be monitored and asked questions that were off color the whole route back. What did you do? Have you been down in this galley? Have you been around these containers? You weren't messing with them, are you? Do you know this unit? Too many questions that really didn't involve the mission of getting the stuff from point A to point B. I had to assume that there was a major amount of funneling of materials going on between countries. We already saw it firsthand on the ground, just with outright equipment being seized and given to the Kurdish and Bedouins. And then seeing the discrepancies in the shipping. Came home, things only got worse in the military. Massive numbers of Saudi veterans basically given a golden handshake type plan. You leave active duty, we'll give you this huge check, and you sign a contract that you'll never come back to active duty or ask for medical care even. And then this is guys are already getting sick. So now you're seeing you're getting screwed by the own people you volunteered to serve. So that just added another thing, like, what is going on? Well, I was very heavily involved being I was in reserves with the whole freedom movement in this country. Speakers like Bill and whatnot, engagements, literature. I was at a particular drill one time, and it was a field exercise in Northern California. And all the people that didn't go, they was having us that had been there teach tactics. And you'd live the full scenario. And what was funny is we weren't involved in the Bosnias and stuff at this point, yet all the OP4, which stands for opposing forces, they're Americans, but they dress in the Russian attire, down to the rank, everything. They act like it, they stay the culture, even down to their mess kits are Russian. They suddenly had massive amounts of this equipment, and UN observers left and right on our bases. And they would probe your lines, and we generally beat the piss out of them because their tactics do suck. And they essentially stuck to the tactics because that's what we would encounter. And the next thing you know, we're involved in these East Bloc countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina and whatnot. So now they've got a whole new fresh crop of guys, but the mindset was drastically different in how they were instilling their mission goals. We were taught to go in and seek out and destroy the enemy and all its holdings, and that's all there is to it. That's your job. You kill people until they give up. The whole police mindset, door-to-door searches, and the practicing of it, which goes on to this day, became more prevalent. And the soldiers were pampered a lot more, which wasn't getting them battle ready. Even in basic training, they had salad bars, soft serve ice cream, talking in line. You wouldn't have done that, or you'd be pushing that base off the map with push-ups. It was a very strange thing to see, and my friends all noticed the same thing when we'd be in Fort Leavenworth or Bliss or anywhere we went. This whole lightning on our troops and turning their whole mindset into more of a police force, and always under someone else's control. Soldiers I had that had been in Somalia and Haiti and stuff talked about what a mess the whole situation was. Foreign commanders, they couldn't even speak to them, yet they were in charge of us. So you can't even understand what they're telling you, and they don't understand what you're telling them. And my friend's 10th Mountain Division was the unit that had a large part of rescuing those Rangers that Black Hawk Down is based on. And it was insane. He had I was shown photos by guys over there around that incident, aerial satellite photos of the camps and the cities. The intelligence ability was there to avoid such disasters, especially when we're talking about poorly funded and organized warlords. Yet we couldn't beat them, the greatest military machine in world history. couldn't catch one rebel leader. You know, where's he at to this day? No one's come up with him. And seeing these pictures, and they're all marked UN. And this is what they were handed on a daily basis. The intelligence was there, the technology was there, their hands were tied. At that point, I really dived into the books, and I was be at these training things. The upper command was catching on, and they were really probing heavily in the military ranks, and still do to this day for anybody who might think out of the parameters. We proved ourselves. I was highly decorated, honor graduate from every school I've been to. They were grooming me for the highest ranks in the enlisted chains. I would not go officer. And they told me this, my upper command, and I had a good career, military-wise. I started getting disillusioned because of seeing this, and one particular exercise that really proved it to me is I had field grade officers, which is major and above, surround me in the field, literally in a circle, like some kind of street gang, children. And me and another good staff sergeant friend, another sergeant friend, E5. And they said, we hear you're part of this militia stuff. I don't know what you're talking about. I said, I can't be legally by the Constitution, part of the unorganized militia, being that I have an enlistment with you. So they said, well, we don't want to hear your games and stuff. We know how you guys are. You just soon blow everybody up. I said, no, I don't think so. We only want to preserve the oath we took, which is protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And they would do their best to harass you until you just shut up if you had any bone of freedom in you or left the military. And at this particular incident where they literally encircled me, and my two friends, good friends in the military, and still there as far as I know, they were like, well, I bet you got rebel flags hanging in your garage, and you guys are probably white supremacists, which is really funny because my really good friend who was with me and had many of the same freedom ideals about this country. And our role as a military, his name was Jacinto Fronteras, so he wasn't exactly blank, white. He was half Filipino. So it was really funny when they're hitting us with these accusations of being white supremacists. And my other good friend, Will Carraway, I went through enlistment till the day I left in '98. Full-blown uniform service and done. Was as black as you could get. And a very good friend of mine. So it was really odd that they're making these accusations, but on paper, it looks good. And we noticed this wherever we went, and we would meet people from all over on these missions, like Indiana, wherever you could think of, and they were seeing the same things. The degradation of our troops, turning more to a police-type activity, not a go-to-war, win, and come home thing, and really gray zones of commitment as far as anywhere from your enlistments to your strategies to how you engage the enemy to how you conduct affairs in their so-called peacekeeping operations. Then as I went up in the chain, and they have a self-education system in the military, NCOES, it's called Non-Commissioned Officer Education System or Service, depending on when you were in, you can check out books, and they're essentially like correspondence courses. I got books on peacekeeping operations that were U.S. Army field manuals meant to be issued to these privates that are just learning. Their minds are being molded to be in the military. And in the back, first off, I go to pages in there, and it gives you your issued where. You will be issued a UN gas card, and here's through the chains and how you get the payments for it. You will be issued 3 blue scarves, 3 blue berets, 3 blue armbands. I'm like, what in the hell? And then in the back, in the suggested reading, is not like what we were used to. In the back of a field manual, you would expect to see many of the typical suggested readings, TEM, Technical Manual, so-and-so, Care and Maintenance of the M16, Arctic Warfare, Survival, Evasion, and Escape. We're seeing Peacekeeping by Boutros Boutros-Ghali, I am not kidding, in the suggested reading annexes in the back of the manuals. military manuals, UN pamphlets. And I knew definitely there was a major problem. It coincided directly with research and what authors have been writing for years since the UN was conceived. And I started networking my research on a broader basis, began correspondence with Bill. At the same time, I was bringing massive amounts of speaking people together in California.
Okay, so what year was this now?
That would push us now at this time more 95-ish, 96.
So you've had these experiences.
Yeah.
You're now a civilian, but you're still in the Guard.
Yeah.
And you started organizing these.
Speaking engagements, that's all they were, really, yeah. The speakers, Joyce Riley, I had her a couple times speak on the Gulf War illness, to massive amounts at our veterans buildings, in fact, in California. Massive amounts of active duty and retired and people off the streets would come to hear. And none of it was profit. You always inadvertently lost money, or at best broke even. Time you got chairs and multimedia and everything that was necessary, and their travel expenses. So I did this and networked more, and Bill and I started corresponding on research, then over the phone versus the mail. Then not just research, more on a friend basis. And I said, well, hey, you've never been out in our region over here. Why don't you come on out? So I had him and his family out for a week or so in California. And we dovetailed a lot of our research together. And in-depth research, too, you know, the gene caps, the liberties, just even the small symbolic things on notes and national symbols that a lot of people don't see, even though it's right in front of them. At that point, his next conference happened to just be coming up, intelligence conference, so I was invited and I came to it. I had not gone to the others, just usually because of scheduling conflicts between work or military. Then I started staying out here with them afterwards and visiting trips when I had leave and stuff. And this would put us at 97 at this point. Full bore, almost daily correspondence and research sharing and networking with others also. Then in 98, I chose to move here full time, which I did. Retired from the military on a Sunday, was moved here by a Wednesday, and moved here in with Bill. And we conducted the last conference also that we held for the intelligence service, and at that point put all our combined forces together into the research, or the combined libraries. He had pushing some 15,000 volumes in his. By this time I had some 10,000 in my personal library. Our databases, all our research into symbolism and secret societies, integrating all that. We always found little things that one guy had and the other guy didn't, and to synthesize all this into a massive effort. And that's the point where I lived with him full time and lived here in Eager, Arizona. That would be end of June 98.
You want to take a break, get a glass of water?
Yeah.
Okay, Doyel, we're rolling.
Mhm.
You're on.
Okay, this is the light.
Sorry.
Okay.
Somebody's paying attention.
At this, essentially by July 98, I was moved here with Bill to conduct full-time research into the mystery schools and secret societies and the government protocols in general. I often ran errands to let him relax during the day, because gearing up for the show at night was quite a toll, day in, day out, you know. I was in the next town over running some business errands and came back, and he came rushing out to meet me. I said, what's going on? Because he really never did that, and not in such a frantic way. And he said the federal marshals were just here. I said, what? He said, yeah, they came up, and they said they were going to serve me with charges. Well, he countered them with the jurisdictional issue, which he is probably the expert on, or was the expert on, and is on the website. The federal government's jurisdiction. Now, Arizona happens to be unique in the fact that even down to this forest and whatnot, they really stuck to the law, which is that the state did not specifically cede that property and full governance of it to the federal government, the state holds full jurisdiction. The federal government holds none. He told them this. They knew it. The federal marshals walked backwards to get past what would have been a median line had the street been painted with lines of the street to get back into a quasi-public domain and realized they had to leave. We knew there was definite problems arising. We immediately went into a more secure mode around the house. As far as our work, we would offset it, his and mine, so that someone could essentially always be up 24 hours. Someone moving around up doing activities. Because then they, as in federal government, started pulling goofy stuff. Agent Fillerup was an FBI agent out of Pinetop Lakeside. Now, Agent Fillerup was a goofball. And I guess Pinetop Lakeside must essentially have been like the Siberia of service for the FBI. Because, I mean, look at it around here. What you guys have seen, do you think there's like a giant threat of international terrorism or something here, counterfeiting? No. So he came over. Now, him and Bill had already had a few discussions. Bill was trying to educate this man. That's how they knew each other, just like you hopefully would do with your local sheriff, if he'll at least listen to you. Agent Fillerup showed up one day. This is just a couple weeks after the federal marshal initial visit. We were out in the backyard barbecuing, which we often did, and here came he drove like a little Bronco too, those small ones, red and white if I recall exactly. He came bebopping up the driveway, and we flagged him down. The driveway was below our backyard because of the grade of the hill, which you'll have later. He got out of his Bronco and said, "Oh, I just want to talk like old friends." And basically we told him we knew he was full of shit. And, well, let me just hand you this envelope. And he's waving it. No. And we were still barbecuing away, and he was still outside of his vehicle there, and he goes, "Well, I'm going to come on up." And Bill told him point blank, "Do not come up here. You're not welcome. I'm not talking to you. You go back and tell your bosses that there's not going to be another Waco or Ruby Ridge in this country. And this time you guys," and this is his own words, "you stepped on your dick." And he got back in and back down the hill. At that point, he increased his pressure on the local law enforcement. No, Fillerup and the federal agencies. Fillerup specifically as a mouthpiece. He only had about a year. Basically had a timeline to bring Bill in on these trumped-up tax evasion charges and bank fraud. Well, what we did immediately, though, was we wrote, and I can give you one, and I signed it, 126 points of law challenging their jurisdiction and the charges, and I was in charge of all the photocopies, the mailing, and the registered return receipts, all the way up to Janet Reno. And many of these receipts we did get back. We know they got them, these packets. Never a response from any agency or official. And I still have a packet left at home. So they were really in a bind, because the United States Code dictates that based on how they use their jurisdiction, or if they do or don't try a felony, which is now, the ball was in their court because the felony was on them, or by asserting that they have jurisdiction when they don't, the penalties automatically start racking up. 5 years in prison, $15,000 fines on them. So it pretty much backed off, and then the next thing you knew, there was a massive drug program that the sheriff's office conveniently entertained that was using military personnel and military helicopters. Well, they had to refuel, and we have an airport right here in Eager. I went out and shot the breeze with a bunch of them. I knew these guys. Their battalion headquarters was where mine was, down in Phoenix, Scottsdale. I knew the units and all that stuff. "Hey, you know so-and-so?" "Yeah, he's still around, that old guy." And they told me a lot of what they were doing. It was supposedly a drug and addiction program with the Sheriff's Department, in which they were in civilian clothes. But these were not sheriff's personnel. These guys were not from here. They were in ties and all that, and did have, most of them, Glock pistols or 6 Hours, which is a highly issued federal sidearm, 6 Hour. And they would get in and out and go gossip while we were talking over here, and you could tell they didn't like the presence of people from town going out there. I was not the only one, because there were buzz in town, and especially the hill Bill lived on, incredibly low-level flights. I mean, right here, like toss a rock up and hit their belly flights. Leaning out the doors with pistols drawn while the little girls were in the yard, and I'm rushing them in the house. Yes. Then that program suddenly just dissolved. I guess they caught their big drug runners, and I don't remember anything in the papers about it. And we had to maintain a very proactive stance for security, so we would monitor the area, and we had intrusion alarms and, military influence tactics up there as far as defense. And just people came and went all the time, visitors, strangers, whatever. Children loved to play up there and ride their horses. And then the neighbors up there that owned property around him began coming up even and saying, man, I'm tired of this vandalism on my property, or this and that. We watch out for it. So we would. And we wanted to keep everything good and our ties to the community. We had found some undesirables up there doing illicit drugs, ran them off, and even found needles the next morning when there's light to look for something. And we did try to establish a meeting with the local mayor and police force. We used a liaison in town who was, his family was lifelong here and extremely influential family religiously and politically. Basically, they would hear of no such gamut or meeting, the local. But they did pretty much wash their hands of any problems with Bill and I. Many of the local people in positions of enforcement, police level, I'll say, not sheriffs, essentially told him, look, they don't do anything. They don't cause any problems. We've got nothing on. They don't even speed or park wrong. There's nothing wrong. Leave them alone. And essentially wash their hands of it. We did have a meeting with Congressman and his staff. He brought his entire staff up to one of our backyard little barbecue things, and we knew they were coming up, but we had to cook anyway. And they sat and talked to us for quite a while, but they weren't willing to help. And we were, like I say, always wanting a peaceful end to this and an answer to our jurisdictional questions. And to alleviate this problem, another thing we did was contacted any bank he'd ever dealt with. Car loans, banks, house loans, property loans, anything. Oh, no, we're a glowing customer, paid off early, never late. No fraud in existence. So essentially, when the year came up that Filler Up was quasi-given as a deadline and nothing had taken place, he was moved on, Agent Filler Up, to who knows where, maybe the real Siberia. And things seemed to calm down a little bit. And we were hoping that maybe it would just kind of go away. But everything was still fully in place. You could verify it through federal marshal sites and government liaisons. So we still kept a very proactive stance. And then they had to the FBI brought in new agents to fulfill the role here. And Bill was still a heavily targeted person. They had to essentially shut him up. Well, he refused to do so. The IRS thing did not work. The serving of papers illegally did not work. So it was essentially a stalemate. Us saying we're right, and if we're wrong, we'll admit it if you can just prove your point. Here's the case of law that we're bringing up. They never could respond, nor would respond. We offered a $10,000 reward. Anybody that can prove that we're wrong, no one could. And then purposely sent it to think tanks from Washington to the West Coast.
How many did you send out?
Probably 200 directly, let alone the full-time in the Veritas newspaper and website.
Let me pause for 1 second. Well, my question is at this point then, did they, obviously they kept trying to get these various charges up and they couldn't. Did you feel at this point there was an ulterior motive?
Yeah, it pretty much became quite clear, because if they had so much concrete evidence of some charge, and they knew they could make it hold up in a legitimate court, why didn't they just come up, say you're under arrest, whatever? They couldn't. To get Bill in court would be to open up, Pandora's box, because he would be espousing the law and documenting it in such a manner that they would have no choice but to admit that they are acting fraudulently. Plus, everybody in the world could start ordering the court documents and the transcripts. And oh my gosh, it would just be such a headache for them. I don't think they knew what to do. They bit off more than they could chew. This wasn't some spin-off of the Aryan nation's hermit out in the middle of the woods that was going to, do something stupid and walk right into a trap. He knew what he was doing, and he knew he was right. Essentially, it came down to we need to shut him up. You could tell that based on the correspondence and the attitudes of the people that would contact from agencies, contact him via mail or phone. Also, those around us began getting more in-depth harassment, which only substantiated our claims and case. A very good friend of ours in law enforcement circles, which we have many to this day, high up at a state position, and that's about all I'll say, because he still lives here. He's retired now. He was called in by federal law enforcement, composed of FBI and federal marshals, in a meeting behind closed doors, and he brought his boss along, his next up boss in their chain of command. And they had recorded 2 years straight of conversations when he'd call us. So they were even now branching out to anybody that frequently called us. And they would record everything. What are you doing today? And I'm going fishing or whatever. I mean, anything in case something might come up. Still, they've got nothing to go on. So now they're harassing these people around us to try to find something, anything, to bust us on. Illegal weapons. We had none. No explosives, no booby traps, no bombs, none of the contrived tales. And most of them would tell them to, take a hike. And they realized they weren't going to get anywhere with them, and they'd just move on. We were betrayed a few times, and when I say betrayed, not because there was anything to betray, conduct-wise, but the fact that we thought they were our friends, and they went and had meetings with them. One of these was very early on, Pete, who had been at the intelligence conferences and on broadcasts with Bill. He was the dog trainer that trained Crusher, trained dogs for law enforcement officials. He called up one morning, this was early on in the events of 98, saying, I just had a meeting with the FBI, and if you'll just send your family down here in Doyel, we'll settle everything and this and that. We're like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah. And he would watch the family and me and FBI, and everybody would just have a nice little picnic or something, and everything would be done. Well, we caught him for what he was and told him not to bother ever calling or contacting us again, and it did expose it on the air. Later on, Glenn Jacobs also did the same thing, and he admitted live on international talk shows that he was an informant for the FBI. There's very good evidence that he is the one who gave detailed descriptions of the furniture layout in the house to law enforcement officials. We had caught him very early, though, on relatively compared to Bill's demise, and exposed that on the air as well. When it was followed up with interviews, and after Bill's death again, he admitted that he was an informant. And his only job in life was to poke around and make friends with us and try to find something that we were doing wrong, and we weren't doing anything wrong. But they kept pursuing it, so it became an issue of putting on the pressure till he shut up, and he wasn't going to do so.
Okay, so if I were to follow this train, then Bill technically went on the air in the early 90s, right? Like 90, 91.
92, yeah.
92. So, not to say things were smooth, but things really didn't heat up until the late 90s. Until like 97, 98.
Yeah, because his...
Until then, he was just broadcasting information.
Yes.
Okay.
And some very poignant pieces, though, that really put in a stake right in many of the federal government's operations around this country. Operation Garden Plot, the Waco and Ruby Ridge incidences, and several others around the country. And then even their legislative issues and ties to foreign governments and entities like the UN, the World Bank, World Trade Organization, NAFTA, GATT. So he became such a thorn in their side that he had to be quieted. The initial charges were the blunt scare tactic. Most people would fall, oh, okay, shoot, what do I owe you? We didn't know nothing. The IRS scams. Then the federal law enforcement, FBI-type scams, just to outright scare you. Get you into some courtroom where they can falsely claim jurisdiction, or you might outright sign into them if you go into the type class of court they would like to get you in. Constitution anymore. Most of their activities are performed under Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC system.
That's when you signed it.
Yep, because they are contracts. Even though they will deny it, and I have the proof, which you guys will be able to film, to show you otherwise, published by them. And them is in the federal government, under the guise of militia task forces. I do have that. I believe that the push and urgency to stop Bill's message came to a great standstill because they suddenly realized that even by law and by the fact that they were challenged by the points of law to respond, they didn't and couldn't, and their case was essentially shut down. And it came to the point that any sort of federal case, like the IRS charges or federal marshals or anything like that, was going to go nowhere. So it seemed to kind of come to a calm before the storm, and we got, now what point brought around another resurgence of headaches and problems directed towards us was Y2K. Many government agencies would have the people of the world, especially the United States, believe that Y2K was doomed. We had been broadcasting for months ahead of time its total lies. We had experts from Microsoft that we interviewed, Apple computers, private agencies that said, no, this is not possible. You guys are right. It caused a lot of strain between us and other broadcasters and information clearinghouses because they were just intent on dwelling on this Y2K thing. And even the day of it, we really blew a hole in their sails. New Year's Eve, Bill had WBCQ the entire day, and afternoon, all that, coming up for New Year's proper. And technically for us, as far as midnight being the clock and all that. And he started broadcasting that day, and I kept tabs on it, and we kept tabs worldwide via our satellite links and stuff, and to keep monitor other people that were really purporting this as being the facts, and we're all doomed, you better go store up all this stuff and make runs on the banks. And really they were turning into agent provocateurs in the sense that they were really on the verge of stirring civil angst. And all it would take is one person that might not be that stable to go do something stupid and give the government an excuse to declare a small-scale or mass-scale martial law and walk right into their hands, fulfill what they wanted. Then they would be the right people in their minds and a lot of ignorant people's minds, saving the country from chaos and mass economic crumbling. We kept up to these people, and they were broadcasting, look, we've got 9 hours left till midnight, and that. Well, the problem is, though, is that half of the civilized world was already in the year 2000, and everything was still chugging away really good. So I think if Britain and all of Europe had collapsed because their computers turned off, we would have found out about it before our midnight struck. So that really hurt the people at all levels, amongst your secret societies, your think tanks, your government officials, and just the outright scam artists who were computer experts that knew better, who were out here, even at local levels, as small as our little old town and county. The government was convinced that they had to be Y2K compliant. And much of that integrated, forced even small little places like this to spend money they didn't have to spend on infrastructure and really become more compliant with ISO 9000 system, which is the International Standards Organization, which is a part of the economic plan of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the UN, and NATO of record keeping and compliance, so that no matter where you're at, you will fall under one system of banking and tracking. Is the ISO program. I know this for a fact because I worked in depth in it when I worked at Kraft Foods, because they decided to go ISO. And I had to go to the courses taught by these people, and these people were flown in from Europe and everywhere to teach corporate how to comply with the ISO standards. Really, Y2K was the scare tactic to get people to jump into this standardized system across the board. You know, they tried teaching us metrics in the 70s, and American kids basically said we like the inch and pound better, and it kind of flopped. So here was their chance. That caused quite a bit of heat for Bill, and then caused a splintering amongst him and some of the allies who stuck to it and somehow still stuck to it afterwards. Well, the calendar was wrong because Jesus' first year of birth would have been 0 year in the AD program, so therefore it's going to happen next year. And it just goes on and on. The next thing, I guarantee you, they'll be going out, I believe it's 2012 or 26. I have a lot of dates in my head, though. But the Mayan calendar. Yeah. And then the Mayan calendar, when it ends, I guarantee you, watch a couple years before that, everybody's going to jump on that and take advantage of everybody. Well, the Mayan calendar ended, and since they could figure it out to begin with, that must mean that's the end of man. Then things calmed again. Bill had a more relaxed broadcast, and he finally got to do more of the enjoyable stuff to him. His hobbies, modeling, photography, and that's reflected in his broadcast. Towards maybe the last 8 months or so of his life, because of events happening around the world, and then culminating in 9/11, as far as world-type events, Bill really turned the heat up on the people that would see this country's demise on his broadcast and on his website. And at that point, a person could tell if they had watched the happenings and knew the facts, not just the crap that was put in a paper here and there about Bill or the situation here, and had done their research, that now it wasn't a matter of if but when for Bill's demise. In August of 2001, Bill had a confrontation with the Dr. Scott Hamlin here in Eager. Dr. Hamlin had been going up and playing real petty little games at night and up right next to Bill's property. This particular night, he had his family up there, and they claimed they were just up there to watch the lightning storms. But the problem was Dr. Hamlin would really egg people on. He was a real weasel. And Bill had enough of it and ordered them off the whole area. Just get out of here, I'm calling the cops. Now, if Bill wanted to do harm to him, he would not call the cops, obviously. Bill told me about this the next day, and that was pretty much all that was of it. Then at that point, things would be going on normal day-to-day life. We had just had some car maintenance done on the car he was trying to restore the day of November 5th. I had seen him as usual at lunch that particular time to take care of any business matters. Went down to pay off the mechanic bill, and that was the last I ever saw of him, alive at least. That evening, the tactical team from the Apache County Sheriff's Department had a meeting at night, a training meeting they called it. Approximately 10 p.m., based on the best stories from deputies also involved and reports in law enforcement circles. No typos, whatever. And so because of where he was killed, it would have definitely chipped the rock wall in the front yard. And the door, it's a white painted door, brown, whatever now, I don't know.
Okay, Doyle, we're on. So,
Okay. I think essentially between uh, September 11th and the night Bill was murdered that he had really stepped up his broadcast to really expose those people and entities that would see this country and world's fall from freedom of any sort and integrate into a world government system, banking, commerce, everything, enforcement, military. Uh, he displayed this in the research materials that he was covering in that last period and his exposés of 9/11, which were all broadcasts. There's nothing hidden there and is documented. Uh, and what's really odd is if, with this occurrence, it supposedly spurned the sheriff to proceed with this attack on Bill's house and himself. What's odd about it is that they would let it go on. If he was such a dangerous man to society, why did they let it go from August to November 5th if he was such a threat and dangerous? I mean, I wouldn't want him as a neighbor if he was that dangerous, nor would the community. And they just sat on it. Uh, According to Dr. Scott Hamlin, who was asked to leave the property, in the Eager Police Department report, he called Officer, I believe it was Zarnitska on duty that night, who's still an officer with the Eager Police Department, or that's who he got that night when he called 911. He claims that Bill followed him to his house, threatened him with a pistol at point-blank range, at which point he proceeded to get in a verbal exchange with Bill, profanities and all, both of them, and he was poking. Bill put his finger at him, and he theoretically took Bill's finger and bent it back and scared him. And then he supposedly had pushed Bill, and Bill got in his truck and just drove away. Now, that's the report he gave to Officer Zarnitska. Now, they were pretty detailed in the report as far as the description of Bill and the vehicle. Yet, in the report you will see when Officer Zarnitska had to turn it in to his boss in the chain of command at the cops for what he did that night, obviously, getting off duty and his follow-up report. They ran the license plate number. Now, this is supposedly a family that the wife even said she ran to go get the children into safety and was making sure she got details of the perpetrator, which in this case was Bill, supposedly. They could get no match on his license plate, even though Bill's vehicle was registered and everything, like anybody else's around here. No matches on a license plate, and that's reflected in the police report. So now you have to wonder, well, you know, they can't even get a match on a license plate, and they supposedly got all these details for the cops. That seems kind of odd. So the police did their own investigations through the MVD, Motor Vehicle Department, and had a picture from Bill from some license from years ago, and eventual matches of vehicles. And it still kind of just sat there, and Eager Police Department essentially handed over to the county prosecutor and the sheriff's department to handle the case. Nothing, again, done in this whole entire period, and all along, I do not believe Bill knew anything was coming so drastically, because he would have taken, I'm sure, a more secure stance as far as just all the visitors you would get and stuff, and he didn't bother him. He was doing some very intense broadcasts exposing the Illuminati, secret societies, alchemical societies, your government agencies, implications of the 9/11 before, as far as planning, and after what it was going to mean to this country. He knew, and he told me, because he called me that morning of 9/11 and said, "You got the news on?" I said, "Yep," and he hung up. He told me himself that day that this was the start of the downfall of this country, and we would see a progression towards it faster than anything we had ever seen in the last few decades. The night of the 5th, the Sheriff's Department tactical team was having their meeting. Lieutenant Tafoya, Andrew Tafoya, was in charge. Theoretically, the sheriff was out of the area. He made the call, a haphazard type call, just, hey, what the heck, let's go raid this house. Their guys they were going to pretend to be a bunch of people partying. No uniforms, a regular civilian pickup, and a loud stereo. They parked down the cul-de-sac from Bill's house. They went up there shy of midnight, maybe 20 minutes or so. It woke Bill with all the noise. He went down there in his vehicle, asked them to leave, told them to shut up, and told them, or I'm calling the cops. Now this obviously was not relayed to me by Bill, so it can't be skewed. This was relayed to me by the law enforcement officers themselves. He threatened to call the police because he didn't know these people were sheriffs, because they never identified themselves. And he was looking for a peaceful means again to settle it. He's going to involve law enforcement. He turned his truck around to come back to the house from this cul-de-sac, maybe a 100-yard jaunt at the most. And he's the only house up there, by the way. He's coming back to the house, and that's when he realized something was wrong. Again, I get this all from people who were on site through the event, directly after, everything, who had to go through the briefings with the sheriff's team, and these are law enforcement officials. Bill stopped his truck because people began coming out of bushes everywhere, and these people are armed at this point. This small juniper scrub trees. And one gentleman jumped up on Bill's driver's side, like reaching in the door at Bill. More than likely to grab the shifter, that's common, throw it into park. Bill knocked him off physically, didn't run over him like the report said. Gunned the truck, went up on this little bank like this, maybe like a couple, 2.5 feet tall berm. That tore out his exhaust system, which there was plenty of people who saw that afterwards when I had to dispose of the vehicle. He stopped, held both his hands out the window in open palm position like this to show, look, I'm unarmed, I want to give up. And they were swarming his truck again, armed. Threw it in the drive, gunned it back to his house. As his house would sit, maybe like, let's say like this, semi-overhead view, and out here the road. He came pulling up just as quick, like this, and was parked just at a slight angle off his front grass, no sidewalks or pavement up here. Got out of his vehicle and ran around the back, according to the law enforcement officials that were there or that had to get a briefing immediately after from the sheriff's department. Right here was parked a limousine which Bill had bought for his daughter, Jessica. Sheriff Goldsmith came around it and came up here, and this limousine and Bill's truck would have been nose to nose, essentially like this. Bill's truck at a slight angle. He came around here, and I guess his idea was to use the limousine as cover. Around this end of the house was the Buick, the brown Buick that was Annie's old car and been parked there. I never saw the thing run the entire time I knew Bill. Alive at least. I had to move it. And the 58 Chevy was both parked here. Sheriff Marinas came right here, which had to be quite the task because in the back bumper was where Crusher was tied. According to the officers, he ran up here and Crusher popped out on his tie. It was aircraft cable. And he jotted back and would have had to go over the hoods of the two vehicles to get free of them because they were parked right up to the wall of the house. And right there was an air conditioning unit for a research studio because all the heat generated by the equipment was into wall units. So you would have had to do a bunch of monkeying around to get over there. He theoretically was standing right here by the 58 Chevy, which does have bullet holes through it. Sheriff Goldsmith, Deputy Goldsmith, I should say, they're all deputies, there's only one sheriff, is over here, And he's basically in perfect alignment with these bullet holes, which you will have pictures of. And that round was never recovered because theoretically it ended up in town, just somewhere. Bill, by now, because he's ran around the back of the truck, he's almost to the underneath the covered front porch, which is only about 5 foot covered front porch, concrete sidewalk and a flower bed in his front door. He is then gunned down. While he's running, he is supposedly with his right hand, mind you, back over his shoulder, firing randomly. That would put his bullets back into the street and at his truck, not over here, and especially doesn't coincide with the bullet hole at an angle like this when he's over here. He can't shoot that angle. Goldsmith could. He's the only one over here shooting that could shoot that angle. Marinas is struck. Yes, one was in the head, but it was like a glancing type thing that caused the injury. It didn't like go in all the way through or anything, obviously. He fell down in this little burrow that Sugar Bear, the dog, had dug and liked to lay in to keep cool. Bill was shot at angles that cannot be really described accurately based on how everybody was placed in the yard, the position of the vehicles, the bullet hole in the 58 Chevy, and his entrance and exit wounds in his body. The angles of them do not coincide, and that's based on the autopsy report from Tucson.
So where was Bill shot?
Several spots. I hate to say it on tape, but the forensics report has the diagram. So, just to be safe, I mean, because they were different angles, and they had some magic bullets, like in Daly Plaza, the way some of these paths went. If a guy was standing up, especially, not gunned down when he's laying face first in the yard, which is an indication of these bullet paths and trajectories. They, at that point, called the ambulance. Now, I doubt they just used open 911 radio lines because anybody with a scanner could have heard it. They did have a lot of radio traffic because I have 2 people in this community who were listening to scanners and recorded some of it. And that included prior to the shooting, and essentially it is fully proves the sheriffs were guilty of murdering Bill. The radio conversation before and right after. And yes, I'm telling you where I got them though, because those people are in very much fear of their life. Yeah. And so this is approximately 12:07 when the shooting's done. So now it would be the 6th of November proper. I'm talking nighttime. The ambulance is called up. Now, I living very close, as well as neighbors that live right at the bottom, and you have to drive by their house because the road to Bill's house is kind of like a driveway more than a road because it's not paved or anything by the city, even though it should be. And you had to go by these homes, and it's loud and bumpy because it's just gravel. No one heard this stuff. They did get up there, obviously, but it's because they were told to keep their sirens and lights off coming up there. The ambulance paramedics were, to not cause a disturbance, and also witnesses, obviously. They carted Marinas away to where he was flown out then to big facilities in the valley and stuff that could handle a case like that, not a little local clinic or anything. Bill was left to lie there in the front yard. The problem is here comes a few more problems. Besides the fact that he tried to surrender twice, according to people that were involved in law enforcement up there, it was also put out to the sheriff's deputies in their meeting before they ran up there playing cowboy. And this was relayed to law enforcement officials that had to be called in after the shooting, which would include Eager Police Department, that they were not going to allow Bill to get back in his house alive. They did not want to deal with a media standoff or Ruby Ridge or Waco, and he was not going to be allowed in alive. Just point blank. So it's premeditated murder, is what it comes down to. Non-lethal devices are the supposed norm in the country and this state. It's supposedly stressed and was verified in newspaper articles afterwards, not even pertaining to Bill's case, just informational articles out of the Arizona Republic. No such device was used, nets, stun guns, anything. All the fancy foams and rubber bullets, none of that. The Apache County coroner, to declare Bill dead and deny him, obviously, medical treatment if he's dead, happened to be Dr. Scott Hamlin. He was not called, theoretically, because he'd be a conflict of interest, which he would be, but I can't believe they used such wise judgment now all of a sudden. So Navajo County had to be called to clear the next county over. And obviously woken up, all this stuff. So there's a huge time frame here. But Bill received no medical treatment. The sheriff's deputies took it in their own hands, and the paramedics, that he did not need to be treated. And he was just gone for good, and that's all there was to it. But because none of the reports accurately reflect who made this declaration, it's hard to tell the sequence of events, why he's laying there, whether he was still alive, shot more, based on the angles of the autopsy, what occurred. The next, he was left here this whole time, mind you, to continue bleeding and stuff. They tried to capture Crusher, which they knew not to do, and that gave them an excuse to shoot Crusher. Sugar Bear was tied to the post of the front porch right where Bill was trying to get to the front door. Sugar Bear was interrupting their investigation of the crime scene, so they let Sugar Bear loose, and he was missing for 2 weeks and just showed up one day when I was up there, full of birds and stuff. Had just been wandering the countryside. They really scared him off when the sheriffs did, and the investigators, because he obviously was trying to get to the blood and junk. That morning, early morning, the sun's up, but not much. This is November, mind you. I look out the front, and there's eager police department vehicles going back and forth in the school bus parking lot across from my home and the ends of the street. Pretty soon I see then Sergeant Frazier, I believe he's lieutenant now, for the Eagle Police Department, pull up and have a discussion with them. It didn't look like a friendly discussion, and approach my front door. I came out, met him on the porch. He had his tactical gear on. I knew something was wrong, because I had already looked up the hill like this and could see the barricades on the only way to get to Bill's house or use those roads at the base of the mountain. He came up and said, I need to tell you that Bill was killed last night. If you need to talk or cry or whatever, you can. I said, well, what happened? At this point, he gave me a brief rundown of the events of the night, including the hands up surrendering, as he was told. Also how the chief was called after the whole incident, and it was woken up out of bed, the chief of police here, Scott Garms, to be told that he has a citizen that's been killed and an officer of Apache County is down and being medevaced out. He was not told that they were going to do this, even though it's his own town here. He then awoke the key people, like Sergeant Frazier, to meet him up there, and they got the brief rundown from the incident team on site with the sheriffs. DPS was called in to run the whole site investigation. That's common practice here, Department of Public Safety, Highway Patrol, because they'll be impartial, theoretically. They're not tied to any one town or district. The site investigation went on all day through horrible monsoons. Throughout this, I'm trying to keep my head on as far as, I need to stay organized and find out what's going on. People were coming by the house. I'm having to run them off. Press is coming up from the valley. There's helicopters already circling around us, waiting for the regular ground reporters to get here. They asked the Eager Police Department officer asked if I would be willing to come out to the Incident Command Center, the ICC. This is a common term used for anything, chemical spill, whatever. And it was at the rodeo grounds at the edge of town. I said, yes, I'll go out there. So I said, but you're not leaving me there alone, because I don't trust them bastards. And I went out there with Kirkham, who at the time was lieutenant. Now he's a sergeant. Him and Frazier basically just switched ranks. The time it was Lieutenant Kirkham, Paul Kirkham. He's still on duty and all that. He took me out there, and he made small talk on the way out there, just to, I think, just to keep me, my mind occupied. We went out there, and we went in there, and they had on a large table in their meeting room several officers first off in this room in their black tactical gear, and they really think they're hot stuff. These guys tried to intimidate myself, and I believe to a certain extent even Officer Kirkham, because Kirkham was sticking to me like glue, like I asked him to, and to watch my back, and he just stuck wherever I moved. He was right there. They were real egotistical, arrogant. It was almost like a, you would almost be like they had just finished a championship race or a hunt or something, and they were all around the campfire bragging. That was the air you got when you walked in here. And on this large table was satellite photographs, aerial reconnaissance of the property. And at that point, after I saw those, they weren't trying to hide them whatsoever. They brought out what they tried to make a rough sketch of the floor plans and wanted me to verify that these were accurate. I said, well, what was the purpose? Well, because it's booby-trapped, and we have good intelligence that it is, which it was not, by the way, and they found that out. They had arranged for the robot device on tracks with the camera and stuff on it to be used from Phoenix. Okay, fine. Well, since we can't get across the yard because it may be booby-trapped, and the door might be booby-trapped with a house full of explosives and booby-traps, we're going to send the robot in, and we can't do that without possibly blowing the front door completely off out of the wall. I said, no, don't be doing that. Just open it. He came out, so obviously it's unlocked. Somebody's going to stop and lock it up to go chase what he thought was high school kids, I assume, away. So, and I offered, I said, I will give you bastards the opportunity to pull out your guns, stick them in my back, and I will escort you through that house and open any cupboard door, move any box, anything you want me to. Don't destroy the house. That's his little girl's only thing they're ever going to get now from their father, being that he's dead. They refused to do that. They said that wasn't standard protocol. I said, well, no shit. But obviously gunning down people at midnight over basically a domestic misdemeanor class dispute isn't protocol either with tactical teams. Who serves an arrest warrant at midnight? So, on one lone person. So, they went up there, and I, throughout the morning, constantly checked updates at the barricade at the base of the hill for the street going up. The officers there were quite concerned about their own safety. I particularly recall the one officer was very new to the force in Eager. He still is. In fact, I think he was still on where he had to ride with somebody status training. The other one was Mike Nuttall from Springville Police Department, which were, both towns here are connected. And they asked me even, are we going to get, like, killed today by retaliation? I said, why? You want me to make a phone call or something? And that didn't settle too good with them, but I was in no mood to joke anyway. And I said, did you hurt anybody, Mike? No. I said, then why are you going to get killed? Well, I think we're in danger because something wrong went on here. It's his own words to me out in the pouring rain. About noon, I got the call from local officials that the sheriff was going to hold a press conference at the same Incident Command Center in County Fairgrounds there on the edge of town here. Or not County Fairgrounds, but rodeo grounds. And I tried to go. I went out there. FBI agents, marshals, everything, out the kazoo, all his black dress stormtroopers. The sheriff is there. When I approached and asked to be let into the press conference, I was told media only, no civilians allowed. So now they're putting themselves in a quasi-military mindset because we're all of a sudden all civilians, which is one of the sick things about federal law enforcement and, unfortunately, sheriffs that buy into it because of funding. So I left. I went down to Eagle Police Department, filled out the official form to get the police report, paid my $7. That's the cost, at the time at least. And went home. I had to keep myself busy. The helicopters were circling my house. I had people driving in front in very nice unmarked vehicles, which would tell me they were government. Some even had government plates, but weren't distinctive as to what agency they were. Taking pictures of me, of my property, my vehicle. I went in the back and burned trash. Now it sounds idiotic, but what else are you going to do in light of all this? I had a big brush pile, and it was raining anyway, so I wasn't going to get away, to eat up the day. The afternoon came about, made dinner for those I had to make dinner for, and at this point, one of the law enforcement officials that had been kind of on loan, for lack of a better word, to the sheriff's department for their drug task force, was helping Eager Police Department with all this stuff. Because at this point, Eager Police Department was kind of tasked with all the junk work that is man-hour intensive. Barricades, public relations, everything. DPS is wrapping up their all-day-long site investigation. Bill's body has been out there all day, so who knows how it was tampered with. Cameras, nobody was allowed up there. You couldn't get within it to get camera views. Even the helicopters were shunned off, so they couldn't get views of the body. So there's no way to ever tell if it was moved 100 times maybe before the ambulance picked it up. It was then taken to Tucson Forensics Lab for an autopsy. This officer had to essentially negotiate with me what to do with the property. They knew that I had fiduciary responsibilities of the entire trust and the documents, which they had already seen. So they had to conduct a search of the house interior, and this theoretically was going to be the first time anybody had been in the house after the initial making sure there's no booby traps. He needed proof of residency. Well, just that day, when I had picked up the money for the auto mechanic from Dale and visited with him and had lunch, I had brought up the water bill, and I had laid it right by the front right burner of the stove. And I said, oh, well, right here is going to be a water bill. Is that good? And they said, yeah, utility bills are commonly used. And unfortunately, we're going to need the gun that he probably would have used had this event occurred with Dr. Scott Hamlin. He was very good about it because he had no proof in his mind at this point that Bill was guilty of anything, I don't believe. I said, well, that would have been his 1911 Army 45 that he always carried, always on his hip. If he was to have done such a thing, that would have had to be what Scott Hamlin saw, theoretically. And I said it'll be on his nightstand. Because for some unknown reason, what he supposedly used to shoot back at the sheriffs and injure Marinas, supposedly, was a snub-nosed .38, Smith & Wesson. And he never carried that Smith & Wesson. He had it, but that was not what he took. The 45 has wear on it. You can take pictures of that. I have it. His holster was worn. I mean, it was something that was worn just like a watch. That was still on his nightstand, and they found it right where it would be, where I told them. They got that, and they had basically an inventory slip listing this, and a box of bullets, to show that he could have shot it if he had to have, at some point. And that doesn't mean anything. Those bullets could have been 10 years old. I said, I want to go up there. Lieutenant Kirkham refused to allow me. He suddenly had this change of heart during the day. Refused to allow me to be present during the house search, even though I had legal fiduciary responsibilities. I said, fine, just get it done. Came back down and got me, this other officer. I went back up there. They had an inventory list. They were parked down from Bill's house, maybe 75 to 100 feet. right kind of where the upcoming road splits to go down the cul-de-sac where he was first accosted in his house. I got out, I signed it, they gave me my copy. It's a carbon type deal. And the house is now mine. They walked me through it to show me that it was secure. The sheriff's department did conveniently take the keys and everything, so there was no way to lock it or get in and out. And they conveniently locked the door, by the way, when they left. So the police officer had to get in so they could get these items and then walk me through the house to show that they hadn't stolen anything or broken up doors or whatever. By getting in the back window of the dining room, just sliding it open, and then unlocking the front door. And I said, that's okay, and they were going to clean up the mud. I said, nah, the mud's not what I'm worried about at this point. Looked around with them. At that point, he did remark, this is the AK-47 so-called assault rifle by the front door that was a machine gun, supposedly full automatic, as testified by the informants, Glenn Jacobs being one of them. It was a Browning 30-06 hunting rifle with a scope. And he just shook his head. I took legal possession of the property at that point as fiduciary responsibility as far as managing it and ensuring its safety and conveyance to the beneficiaries of the trust, which were Bill's daughters. And we locked the door and went home. And that would essentially be that first very long day's events that occurred.
The conversation you had with DPS in the rain, is that the same one you were telling us about?
Okay, no, DPS I never got to speak to, actually. Okay, they were running a site investigation.
So there were people that were telling you what...
They would have to run up and get updates, or they were just telling what they'd been told. For instance, I was told by the sheriff he tried to surrender. And I was told by the sheriff's deputies that we were not allowing him back in alive. And these are law enforcement relaying this to me. Also at the barricade at the bottom of the hill, the Mike Nuttall. And I want to say the other young gentleman who's still a cop to this day in Eager Police Department. His first name I want to say is also Mike, but I do know his last name is Schweitzer. He lives just down here across the street from the police department. I believe he was the other gentleman there. I'm quite sure of it.
And these people also told you the DPS were the ones who said that they believed that he was shot actually by...
Deputies did. Deputies relayed it as they were just... I guess basically these people just mingled around and talked and compared stories during the night is the gist of what I got. And as they had to do a briefing with the Eager Police Department, and then anybody they called in, like Springerville Police, just to handle the situation. Anywhere from publicity to the press conference to everything, and safeguarding the chiefs and all this, because supposedly they were all under a threat, and to waste time watching me burn trash. They had a lot of meetings, coordinating meetings, and this is where briefings would be given out, and law enforcement officers told me that were there from early on in the event, either during the actual shooting till the end of it, or called up right afterwards, and then briefed that there was speculation amongst people, including ranks as high as lieutenant and stuff in the law enforcement, that Bill was shot by Goldsmith for sure, but also Marinas, because of the trajectories and where people were at versus Bill's body, and the way he was shooting versus Marina's position, which would have been kind of like if your camera was Marina's and I was running to the front door in Bill's case, the 58 Chevy behind Marina's and its bullet holes and trajectory would indicate being shot, if the camera was him, from an angle like this, essentially, which would put you right about where Goldsmith was at, which is correct for the angle through the glass, whereas Bill, to be running and be on his front porch gunned down when he was shooting over his shoulder, that would have had to be way over here, a good 25 feet. And he would have had to have been shooting back this way, which would have meant he was shooting at his truck in the road, which I wouldn't doubt there was people over there, because they were coming out from every direction, according to police. He could not have shot at this angle from where I'm at, a trajectory to the camera being Marina's, yet be way over here 25 feet shooting backwards. It doesn't match. And I'll show you the glass. It's still in the car, not in the location, but I have pictures I took on site with a very credible local witness, and I'm in the pictures so that if they could be analyzed at some point, I can be used as scale. And I took a known object with me in every picture that I still possess, so it can be measured. You know, I thought about all this. From an investigative standpoint, that can be used as scale, and all the measurements could be made in the photos. Marinas went down for the intensive stabilizing stuff and all that, critical condition, and was taken care of very well by the doctors. I'm sure they would have done it for anybody. When I asked little questions during the day, like, well, what about Bill? Is he just out there? You letting him get rain soaked? What's going on? Or blackbirds pecking at him? I was told things like, well, we're not animals. He's covered up with a poncho. Things like this. I was like, yeah, whatever. You're not animals. Okay. Really, the law enforcement turned sour, even though I was very congenial. And the police chief even said so. He never saw a raised voice out of me. I was very organized, thorough in my questions, never rude. Yet they turned a cold shoulder as the day went on and did not want to give any information out. And it really culminated, that attitude, in that whole search thing. If all they're getting is the water bill and the pistol, which is all they got, I got it back, and the box of ammunition, why the secrecy? Basically, it was just don't talk to Doyel by that time. But more discrepancies came up because it's indicated in the police reports during that day, this whole time of the 6th that went on, all day, till the night of, of the 6th, that DPS went in with digital video and filmed almost everything and every possession of Bill's. That was nowhere on the search warrant, so it wasn't even legal. Yet, plus they outright lied and said, except for clearing the house of theoretical booby traps, and there weren't any, they just checked, the house had never been in anybody, and that was why it was locked when the sheriffs pulled up camp and left. And now your police is stuck with a locked house and having to officiate the search warrant, unfortunately. The search warrant also started out with enough stuff to really take possession of everything. It was written in such a way as to say, any thoughts recorded by Bill. Okay, now that could be a diary, or it can also be a floppy that he saved something to as he typed. Then it said any device used to record a thought possibly by Bill. Now we've got every tape deck, every VCR, every computer. They wanted every broadcast, all this stuff. Well, luckily I happen to know about a case where they just recently had searched, recently at that time, where the same thing was not done to the particular person here in Eager, and confronted them with the exact case and names. And they stumbled every direction. You would have thought they were drunk. I mean, they physically even moved as if they were struck with a force. And they reconvened, and it came back to my house. Okay, well, we'll just get a water bill and a pistol and a box of ammo. And dropped everything else off that list. And they knew where they were backed into a corner, and that's pretty much when they saw that I wasn't stupid, and they weren't going to ramrod me.
And also, what about the, you say the warrant to serve on Bill was initially served on a date other than when it occurred? Yeah, on the bottom of the warrant, the only signature in existence, now they have to get a warrant from a judge, and it's Judge Sherry Geiser. She's a justice of the peace here, that's all we have. She's a very nice lady, very astute, and just down home. If you're having a barbecue, she'd drink a beer with you just like the neighbor maybe. She would not screw this up. Their search warrant has her signature and date of November 6th. So that means that on the 5th, when they went up there after the training meeting and conducted the whole thing, they didn't have a signed search warrant.
So how did she get involved in
I assume they must have the next day brought it to her to officiate it. But that's the only signature on it. You know, you have to close out a warrant too. Now at this point it was obvious there wasn't going to be a trial. So they probably closed the warrant, especially after I told them you're not taking all that stuff, and I have some of the best attorneys in the nation on trust, ready with plane tickets, which is the truth, from around the country, 5 of them, ready to hop on a plane. at a phone call. I already had established a phone tree also. So I had multiple contacts that all knew the same phone tree, and all I had to do was make through to one of them, plus people here watching my house, if anything goofy happened, that had the same phone numbers. So they backed off on that. I think they must have officiated the search warrant sometime that afternoon with her, because it was a regular business day. It was, a day of the week, I should say, Monday through Friday. And so she would have been in court, or at the courthouse available. Must have signed it to officiate it, but it's, like I say again, there's nothing with her signature and date on it for the 5th to even conduct this operation. Just the 6th, saying, yep, this is a search warrant, and I guess it's done now.
Was she ever questioned on that?
I would assume by DPS. Now, DPS, they conducted their research and their site investigation, as it's called, knowing this was going to take forever for them to compile, and the hundreds of photographs they took. Now, DPS doesn't have a flat rate. You pay big time for their reports, even down to each photo. I wanted the whole thing. I didn't care the cost. Well, I went to Eager Police Department, and I went to this Frazier, and he went right to the chief, because he found out right here at Eager Police Department, even though they were directly involved in it, there was no reports from DPS or sheriffs, and he couldn't understand why. There was nothing in Bill's file. And I caught him right there on duty in uniform in front of everybody else at the city hall. So he went scrambling around. He contacted the sheriff's department to get it first. They refused to give it to Eager Police Department. He had to get the county prosecuting attorney for Apache County and threaten the sheriff's office so he could get a report, and he's the person that was there and an agency that was there and involved. When he got the reports, he approached me at Circle K, and then approached me at Frontier State Bank, which is basically right next to it. And I told him that I wanted everything. Well, the chief's on vacation now, and he has to sanitize it. Sanitize it? Well, he has to go through and see what can't be let out to the public. So what do you mean? It's a public document. That was the last time I was ever asked to be given a copy, and to this day, they still never gave me one. I pursued it and pursued it and pursued it with nothing but bureaucratic runaround or refusals. When I asked for everything from Tucson Forensics Lab back through the Eager Police Department again, always making sure there's multiple levels involved, not just me that they can deny, oh, he never called us. They actually sent a person to tell me from the city that they had the access now to even the clothing Bill was wearing that evening. I wanted to have a nitrate test conducted for powder residue for close proximity shooting. When I said I wanted everything, it was countered with, well, it's quite messy and some of it was cut off of them, so it's ripped and stuff, and that's protocol. I said, well, I understand this. I want it. I don't care. And I want everything else back. His watch, his glasses, I mean everything, even his keys that this sheriff took. So they said, okay, we'll get it right to you. I've never received it. After that point, when I said I wanted the clothing, and when queried why, and I told them I'm going to have it done by a lab for nitrate tests. Never received any of it. I was never approached again to get it. I'm avoided by these same officers that initially were getting this stuff for me and admitted they got it or had the way to get it to me. Suddenly cold shoulder to this day. I don't know who or what got to them or why I never got any of that information, because they obviously would have probably never known. They did not have the DPS and sheriff's reports in Bill's file at Eager Police Department had I not been the one to go down and say, I want all the reports. That was when he went back and found out, Frazier, that they weren't there. And that's when he ran into the whole thing, problems getting them. None of that would have even occurred without me. So they really went out of their way, honestly, to help me. And then something just threw up a wall, and now don't talk to Doyel, don't cooperate, anything. I don't know what happened as far as that goes, that situation. I was told by 2 more deputies that they also speculated that that very night they were there, that Bill was, again, shot by Goldsmith. It was pretty obvious, but Marina's was shot by Goldsmith, not Bill or some other stray officer. And that really threw real monkey wrenches. There were more officers than I was even being told. Shooting, at least, right there in the front yard. These two officers asked me not to relay any of this info due to fear for their lives. And that's pretty scary when they're scared of their own department.
Why would Goldsmith shoot it off?
Probably accidental, quite honestly. Just, again, no lighting. There's no street lights. Nothing. Heavy cloud cover. One of the biggest monsoons of the entire year occurred that day. God put a blight on this valley. And that particular day. So that night, no light whatsoever. No street lights anyway. The only house up there. A lot of shooting.
No real witnesses.
Yeah, Sheriff's Department and Bill. There's no way for there to be a witness. There's no neighbor. The neighbor's at the bottom of the hill, and when you film it, you'll see that even if they were on their front porch with a video camera, they could not have caught a single frame of what went on. It's impossible. It could only be done from a helicopter because the hill's so steep. They're here and he's here. I did film the following day. I had friends filming the news programs that were coming on, the big three, CBS, NBC, and ABC out of the valley. When I say the valley, when I refer to that, I mean Phoenix. I filmed off my doorstep the activities going up and down the hill, vehicles and everything, zoomed in the best I could. So you can see the amount going up and down, sheriffs, civilian looking, but obviously government, forensics labs, and all the goons walking around with their arms. I still have that footage too, of course. And, but that was as close as I could get. So what went on with his body, or the shooting during that night or anything, no one will ever know. But Bill, those sheriffs, and God, that's it. Marinas, well, we got to stop. That's a whole, like another chapter. Yeah.
Okay, we are rolling, and let's talk about the burial.
Okay, well, essentially, even including the November 6th, and obviously certain things had to be done. Burial arrangements and whatnot. He had no family here, so I immediately took to task with trust attorneys and friends around to try to contact any relatives that we could to facilitate them coming to the funeral. Bill's father called me. He was notified by the federal marshals in the State Department on his own doorstep that Bill had been killed. He immediately, through Eager Police Department, got a hold of me. If I recall, in fact, because they couldn't give him my number, they had to tell me and get his number and me call him back and da-da-da. He offered me a lot of advice because instantly out of the woodwork came the bad stuff that surrounds the funeral. Bill's wife from years and years ago, at the time 20 years divorced roughly, Jessica's mother, she popped up. She was definitely not a stable person. And Bill's father warned me about her, and Sally's her name, and she proceeded to do things, calling at 1 and 2 in the morning, calling the funeral home and trying to change the time and date of the burial even. Through these arrangements, being not having the money accessible right then to pay for anything, I had to do handshake deals with the funeral home, and he was very gracious about it. He had to run the press off constantly, even the viewing and the funeral day and beforehand and everything, and he did a wonderful job of it, keeping press and undue pressure away, accommodating our special needs, getting me the multiple copies, original copies of death certificates so I would have them. Because those take special paperwork, and having a trust doing the paperwork is not the most common thing in any of these. And when it came down to the church, that's an interesting piece. Is I had my first idea was just to go to the Baptist church. Now, I did not even attempt the Mormon church because Bill would not have wanted that to begin with. He had covered extensively the Mormon religion on his broadcast and in his research, the God makers, and showed them to be heavily inundated with false prophets. Because that's their own term as prophets, so just threw it right back at them. And I went first to the Baptist church, the local one here, because I had my Weeblo scout troop. It was like 10 children. I ran that. And that was at the Baptist church we had our meetings, and the pastor Mike Taylor, I thought would be accommodating because he knew me. He said, sure, no problem. But the next day I get a call back from the church secretary that we were denied use of the church. The church council, basically like a board of governors, because they're just a corporation, denied its use. They didn't want Bill having his services held there in their church.
Why?
They said it'd be too controversial. At that point, I then contacted one of the Church of God, a very small church, but it doesn't matter. They wanted nothing to do with the services. Again, too controversial. I was turned away every bend I went until finally it was the day before the funeral date and programs are done, and he has to be buried and interned, and the city has done their job of getting the cemetery plot ready. And I went to the Presbyterian church. Pastor Jerry, I got hold of the secretary first. She goes, well, I'll call Pastor Jerry. Is it about Bill Cooper? I said, well, yeah. And she goes, yeah, we heard. And I'm sure, just like anybody else, construction guys, anything, I should assume pastors have coffee and talk. And he said to his secretary and his council that every person has a right to a service. And he said, you can have my church, and not only that, my sound people will be there to record the thing if you want, because they have microphone and recording like a studio, nice Behringer equipment for their choir. And I'll work closely with Juke's Mortuary to keep the press out of there, and I'm not even going to charge you. Don't even worry about it. So he was very accommodating. The city was the same deal. I went down to the city of Springerville, where Bill is buried at the Springerville Cemetery. I told them I don't have the money for the plot. They said, no problem. The field workers, the bulldozer type guys, met me after their own hours when they could have been at home, let me pick out the plot. They dug it, guarded it, and guarded it afterwards even until they knew that somebody wasn't going to go up and vandalize the site. And that was just looky-loos, souvenir, scroungers, things like that. Because I'd gotten that word from law enforcement officials, everything. The Aryan Nations branch over the way in Snowflake here was going to come and disrupt the funeral services and cause an armed conflict. And the DPS had to quarantine with roadblocks the area checkpoints, and once they quarantine, for about 110 miles around us, because their intelligence people in the field had also caught wind besides the local law enforcement. So it was getting to be quite the uphill battle just to intern them. And Pastor Jerry really came through in the end. He allowed us to use his kitchen and facilities, and local people helped me cook the food and donated it and set it up and clean up. That morning of the services, Sally showed up, Jessica's mother, from years back. Jessica would be best known to the audience because that was the long-lost daughter that popped up about a year before his death that he covered on the air and flew her in and visited and all that. He hadn't seen her since she was about 3 years old. They basically just moved and hopped around until they just fell off the face of the earth, and there was just no contact. Bill's father, no one had any contact with that part of the family. Didn't know how to. she showed up. I had a very nice lady, mutual friend of mine and Bill's, and several of us that came from the East Coast for the funeral, and she was staying in the house to kind of watch it, so that night before I could be at rest and handle all my arrangements in my own home for the next day. And I get up there, and Sally and Jessica and a friend are here, and they rented a pickup. And I said, "Why'd you bring this pickup for?" With a drive from Phoenix like that, all jammed in the cab instead of a car. "Well, that's because we came to pick up our stuff." I said, "What stuff?" "Oh, well, this is our belongings now. He's dead." So I proceeded to kick her off the property and told her she could get dressed at the church or McDonald's or wherever. I didn't care. At the funeral services at the Presbyterian Church, some very close friend of ours were late, about 20 minutes. And he came to me in the pews while people were speaking and said, "Where's the sign-in book?" Because that was another thing in the casket flag, saving for the daughters, his two little girls, Dorothy and Pooh. Excuse me, Pooh and Allison. Dorothy is Pooh, as her nickname. And he said, "The book's gone." So I go out there, and I'm like, "What the heck?" So I went to Mr. Jukes, and the funeral director, and he went to the pastor, and the pastor's assistant had been told by a lady named Sally that all these were her possessions, and so load them in her car during the service. Casket's still open and everything. Then she had the gall to want to put in, before the casket was closed, a single red rose on his chest, which I refused her to do. And I got the books back, and then we went to the graveside part, and I had a gentleman that was 40 years the head Veterans Burial Administrator for the whole European theater, and he knew Bill was a decorated veteran. He volunteered his services and traveled all the way here. Mr. Jukes arranged that for him to conduct the graveside ceremony. And the flag I donated to the young gentleman who did the services for us. Him and his because his family's ties to Bill and I, he practically grew up around us and now was in seminary school in Texas to be just a Protestant preacher. And he conducted the services for us. It was really his first taste as a professional because he was still in college for this. I gave the flag to him at gravesite. Sally attempted right during the ceremony to take it away from him. Caused another big ruckus. So everything was just a major headache surrounding this whole ordeal. And at the end of it, when we went back to the church for the food, friends of mine had cooked up a bunch of stuff because, again, buying food was not an option, and had it there ready. She came in and caused a big stink, yelling and screaming, and stormed out of the church and was going to be back with a lawsuit, which she did try, and I beat her because she had no ground. She was lying outright, said that Jessica was a trustee, but they didn't have any paperwork, and just little lies like this. Her own attorney told her to snuff and go pound sand, and because she hired a local who had more background than she realized and wasn't going to take the case. The church thing was a big dilemma, and I think basically the smaller churches were outright scared due to intimidation, because the church we picked happened to be next door to the two-story old Springerville post office, which is still the one today. The second story happens to be where the Apache County Sheriff's has their probation department in their offices. Out those windows, they had binoculars and cameras, the entire thing, observing everybody in and out of the service, and afterwards getting arranged for the motorcade to head up to the cemetery. And after the fact, I found out through law enforcement personnel that they had the helicopters at the Incident Command Center, snipers on duty in a 360-degree perimeter around the cemetery. And the only arrangements I had made, because the local law enforcement, the police, were worried about a ruckus and people getting killed in a church or wherever, I had to have them barricade the road going to Bill's home with, they used a Caterpillar tractor from the city and cones, and just allow me and people helping me in and out. And they had agreed not to have any law enforcement present at the services. And they were the only ones who stuck by their word. And the agreement I made with them was that in my suit pocket I would have a cell phone pre-dialed to 911, and that way I could just hit send, and that was it, because they knew I would be armed. So I said, I'm getting out of there alive, and if there is a problem. And I imagine many people there are going to be armed. But I don't have a problem cooperating with you in that aspect. So I did that, and it went through basically hitch-free, except for petty things like that, and supposed friends that showed up with no forewarning. One of those being Anthony Hilder of talk show fame.
Okay, hold that thought right there before you get bullshit.
It's just during this season, we like have no bugs here. It's so strange. Having grown up in a place where fleas on dogs were problems and stuff, there's like no fleas here. There's nothing. It's just too high or too cold, I guess.
Now, there's 3 different big containers.
First of all. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're rolling. So let's talk a little bit about Bill now.
Okay.
And just what kind of guy was he, and your first impression of him, and
well,
to the point where he passed.
That's interesting because I relayed earlier how we met, but I left out a real neat part about it. When I first decided to have him out here, and it was more than just letters or the occasional phone call for just research, and now we're going to have to do more logistics that are more of a personal level, you know, lodging accommodations, whatever. I just told him. I called him up, and Connie was he had an assistant named Connie. And basically, she just did the orders and bills and sorting, stuff like that. Not really a researcher whatsoever. Secretary. And called Connie, and let me talk to Bill. And so he got on the phone. I said, well, Bill, before we get this done, you've got a reputation for being an asshole. So if you're going to do that to me, you're not coming out. No, I'm glad you were blunt with me. He says, I probably can be an asshole if people cross me wrong, but so can you. And I said, no, that's cool. So that was it.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
And we're on.
So that was pretty much what broke the ice for us. And when he came out, I had everything ready, but I was always worried there might be something that didn't work out with a speaking engagement for somebody. And I had the large screen televisions because he did a complete, 3-hour synopsis of 2001 and its symbology. He was covering Daily Plaza and the Zapruder film for another 6 hours. So I had overhead projectors, video equipment, lighting, recording equipment. I videotaped all 16 hours of the conference. We had question and answer, and the room and chairs and everything involved. And his rooms, of course. And so I was waiting around, and he called and said, hey, I'm out here at the Best Western. And I was like, cool. So I went, he goes, come on out here. So I went out there, and this is the first time we ever got to meet face to face. Yeah, I knew what he looked like. We had pictures of each other, but that was about it. And it was just a really nice, grandfatherly type, father-type person. Had a kickback, 50s style, maybe businessman's hat, with a band around it. And Annie was there, and the little girls. At that time, Allison was just teeny. And Pooh was about, 6 maybe, 7, maybe about 6. And so luckily my mom and them was real good about helping me with that. And they took her to feed the ducks at the local park. And the little kids got a kick out of that and get Annie away while me and Bill had to do all our stuff all day. And we'd go to dinner and stuff during this whole event and afterwards to compare and a bunch of stuff we had pre-planned on sharing research, and always a very nice gentleman. But if you did cross him or threatened his family, he put down his foot. Very